After many months of intense physical training, in July 2018, 6 bold volunteers embarked on a high-altitude expedition to provide service and strengthen partnerships with native Carol villages in remote Andean region of Peru. Collectively, the 6 volunteers carried over 500 pounds of donations and an additional 500 pounds of expedition gear to brave 10 days in rough mountain geography, rough weather, and rough living conditions that the Carol people live every day of their lives. While in the Carol territories, the expedition team traveled by foot from one village to the next over rugged terrain at high elevations. Llamas carried their food, sleeping gear, and the hundreds of pounds of donations.
The difficulties of the geography made me acutely aware of the possibility that any of us could die, and that the villagers live under these kind of hardships we experienced every day of their lives.
Late one afternoon, several of us hiked up a steep hill in Hapu to visit ailing children in their home. We hiked back down to camp in foggy darkness. That night, I realized how easily we could have walked right off the cliffside.
Risk puts you outside your personal and physical comfort, and this kind of service puts you outside your cultural comfort. Each member of our team developed one or more service projects in the months before the trip. Every service activity included training components to empower the local people in areas of education, healthcare, hygiene, and traditional culture.
I became Days for Girls certified to train the teen girls on how to use washable menstruation kits so the girls would not miss school during their monthly cycles. Before we came, all the girls had were old rags for their monthly flow. The girls were fascinated and delighted with the kits. They couldn't wait to go home and use them. The Days for Girls hand-sewn kits give the girls better hygiene as well as dignity and more days at school.
The students were awestruck and full of wonder with some of the science equipment we brought, especially the binoculars and books on astronomy. Lisa Flynn, a professional artist, developed a cultural art project based on traditional designs used in the Carol weavings. The high school students collaborated in a beautiful way to work in teams to create banners of their traditional textile designs.
I had a lot of fun doing the cultural art projects, and the kids did too. The students were joyful to be doing art connected to their traditional textiles. They were proud of the art they created, and they related to it too. I left the art materials in the classroom so they could do more art after we left.
I created a 5 senses picture book with illustrations and photos of village life so that the children could personally relate to the subject. Each of the senses had hands-on activities to further their understanding. The 5 senses class was also a teacher curriculum training experience to train the teachers how to teach science and similar subjects. The teachers were also delighted to have more enrichment for the Carol children who do not have books, crayons, or even pencils or paper in their homes. The children had so much fun making homemade Play-Doh with color and peppermint scent added. It really struck me how none of the children had such a basic experience. And then I realized that Play-Doh was new to the teachers as well. At the end of each lesson, in each of the villages, I left a copy of the 5 senses book with all the hands-on activity materials and Play-Doh supplies so that the teachers could replicate the learning activities for future classes.
It is such a challenge for the Carol villagers to clean themselves in the constant cold. In each village, I introduced a system of soap protector, and hand brush for the people to wash under the outdoor spigots. I was surprised and pleased at the villagers' positive response to use the hand washing stations, even though the water is quite cold.
I was inspired by our group, especially the medical volunteers. The value of their contribution in treating patients was great, and their impact was phenomenal.
My goal was to empower the local youth to help them to treat broken bones and life-threatening bleeding. The SAM Medical Company donated dozens of flexible, reusable splints that are ideal for use in the backcountry. Because we had no common language, the students studied the pictograms to understand how to use the splints for a broken arm, leg, and ankle. They learned so quickly. Using their friends as patients, they were able to share their knowledge by teaching the techniques in the community meeting.
Boy Scout Clint Brinkerhoff of St. George, Utah, sold neckties with the help of his dad to raise funds to buy wound care medical supplies for the Caro villages. Clint and fellow scouts prepared over 40 trauma kits for us to distribute in the Caro villages. These will be used for treating wounds and broken bones.
In each village, the teens were also trained how to use compression dressings to treat acute bleeding. Once again, they learned so quickly and taught the technique to the rest of the community. I made quite a few unexpected home visits to attend to influenza-stricken people. We were not prepared for this. I felt so helpless. Their suffering really touched me. I had to resort to old-school methods of medicine to assess patients, such as using my hands to touch their chests to check for pneumonia rails and fever.
Santos had an infected thumb, which was black and swollen to the size of a potato. It was injured 20 years ago, and he was in pain all the time.
It was inspiring to me to take care of Santos's wound. Santos could die if the infection in his thumb became septic. Without proper medical care when his hand was injured many years ago, the bone became infected and never healed.
In gratitude, Santos provided us 20 llamas the next day to carry all our gear to the next village. After hiking all day in the snow, they were soaking wet and freezing cold. We were now inside, but they had to hike home. I took off my favorite smart wool hoodie and gave it to one of our guides so that he could make it home safely. To have real life-threatening situations, being so remote and out in the elements, wet and at risk of hypothermia, makes you feel alive and in the moment. We had to push beyond and overcome our personal limits, challenge ourselves, and ask for more of ourselves. On that hike out in the blizzard, all I could focus on was the next 20 steps, stop, catch my breath, and hunker down to get through the next 20 steps.
Hiking from Cochamarca to Yanaruma, we had to get out of the weather. It was snowing and cold. We stopped in the tiny hamlet of Tinki, where a woman welcomed all 8 of us into her home. We were able to dry off our wet jackets and warm up. She wanted to help us, and that felt so good.
I was touched to see such simple and genuine human kindness.
There is a deaf lady who lives near Yanaruma who walked over 2 hours in her sandals in deep snow just to greet us. She had a great deal of difficulty communicating, and we finally understood that her husband was really ill. I was touched at how grateful she was that we were trying to pay attention to her and her issues.
I was inspired by the teacher in Yanaruma, Rogelio. He is so dedicated to the people. The teachers sacrifice so much to be in these remote villages to teach the children. Rogelio was going home to see his family for a week. He had to dig a path with his feet for miles to push his motorcycle through the snow so he could get home to visit his own family.
Berta inspires me. Her job is incredibly challenging and requires so much from her both physically and emotionally. When Berta treks to the villages alone, she's invited into the homes of the villagers. She sleeps on the floor like the families. She eats with them, and she feels she cannot decline food, even when it is not prepared hygienically. I returned home understanding that service is a spiritual path. It is not selfless, rather, it leads you back to self. We fulfill our own needs by meeting the needs of others.
The Carroll communities really look forward to Heart Walk Foundation visits every year. They appreciate everything we do.
I was impressed seeing their annual meetings with Heart Walk Foundation representatives, in which they get to choose the projects so that they can remain in their homelands.
For the first time, I fully realized how our visits are an honor for the communities and yet a burden as well. The people are honored when we come. They always say no one else comes to help us. But our visits are also a burden. For example, in Cochimarca, we stayed in one of the classrooms, so the students had to meet outside in the cold. They don't have much margin of safety in their lives.
It was such a great combination of experiences: landscapes, adventure, people, and service. The people are so open, generous, fun, and sweet. Just being around that energy was inspiring.
When we reached one of the final and highest passes on our last hike out from Queros, we took a moment in awe of the incredible beauty. As a group, we had helped each other through this arduous and epic journey, and we were alive. Adventure and service had ignited a heartfelt sense of accomplishment. We brought with us the goodwill and support of all the Heart Walk Foundation with us.
This expedition, in essence, is the true testament to this foundation's name, a heart walk.